Right now, there are 26 human beings in the world who have collectively more wealth than half the human species.
Live from Gentlemen's Quarters Barbershop. Very special guest today, Osagie Imasogie, serial entrepreneur, lawyer. Pleasure to have you today. Much admiration for your business acumen as well as for your goodwill that you've given to the barbershop. But just to start off, in your journey throughout business, what do you feel is one of the most powerful tools that is available to us to be able to succeed?
Thank you for having me. That's very kind of you. I've always enjoyed getting my hair cut here, but I've actually enjoyed much more the kind of discussions that we tend to have. So thank you for having me. That's very kind. So you've asked an interesting question. I would approach it from two angles. The first one is what has worked for me. It doesn't mean that it works for everyone, but what has worked for me is a framework on three levels. The first being conceptualization. Usually, coming up with a good idea is the hardest thing to do. And in terms of all my businesses, that has been the first step, the conceptualization of the idea. The second step is probably more of a reflection of my limitations. I can't read your mind. You know, some people can, but I can't. And so the second step for me tends to be an articulation of that concept. Now, you have to be able to articulate it in such a way that other people understand it, resonate with it, and are willing to act because of what you've articulated. So the second stage is articulation. My experience has been that if you get those first two right, the third and final stage is just grunt work because it's just actualization. That's making it happen. But if you are not aligned conceptually and you have not articulated in a way that your team can understand it, then the grunt work becomes very, very hard. It's like rowing on the Schuylkill. If you're not synchronized, your boat will just spin. And you spend a lot of energy, but you're not going anywhere. So for me, it's conceptualization, articulation, and actualization. That has been the model, and it has worked for me. So that's one way of looking at it. That's my holistic view. But there is a particular tool that I've also found very, very helpful, which is the whole concept around intellectual property. It is a huge value driver. And I like to work smart. I don't mind working hard, but I really prefer to work smart. And if I can create things that have some form of intellectual property protection, that is one of the smartest way to work because it can generate an obscene amount of value for you. So that's those two, between the broad conceptual framework of conceptualization, articulation, and actualization, and the desire to create things that have intellectual property protection, that combination has kind of worked well for me.
Beautiful. So in that, with intellectual property, what is the framework around, what are the types of intellectual property that is available to us?
Well, first things first. Let's make sure that we're speaking the same language. So let's have a framework of what intellectual property is. Now, I happen to be an adjunct professor at University of Pennsylvania Law School on this field of intellectual property. And I've been lecturing on this for the last 25 years. So I might know a little bit about it. And I also have been a lawyer for over 40 years. And when I was in active practice, one of the areas that I specialized on was intellectual property. Again, I might know a little bit about it. And I also happen to be the chair of the board of advisors of the law school. So this is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And what intellectual property is the legal constructs we have built around products that come from the human mind. Now, there are different constructs we have created, but the base of it all is what comes out of your mind. It's not physical. So it's not like a watch, although you can have intellectual property in the watch. But it's not a physical thing. It's this legal construct. Now, in the case of the United States, we are very, very unique. The basis of our intellectual property is actually our Constitution. I mean, that's really cool.
Is
So,
that like the earliest origin?
the earliest origin within the United States, not within the Western world. There are there's something known as the Statutes of Anne or Statutes of Monopoly in England in 1623. Okay, but in 1787, while right here in Philadelphia, while the Constitution was being debated, or what became the United States Constitution was being debated, a very interesting thing happened. So it's important to understand the context of that, right? America had just finished a war with the sole superpower in the world at that time, Great Britain. That's why they called it Great Britain, right? And so you had 13 independent colonies. Ragtag army had just defeated this great superpower. There was disease in the air. It was a hot July. There were so many things going on in what is now the United States. And when these guys got together in Philadelphia to talk about how do we build Articles of Confederation. So the initial idea was not to create a constitution, was just to figure out how do these 13 independent colonies interact with each other. That evolved into talking about, you know what, we need to do a constitution. You know what, we need to have a country. To think that in the midst of all that, with all those issues, there were two different delegates who put forward draft provisions for there to be, in the Constitution, provisions that control and protect intellectual property. I mean, it's remarkable. It's like opening the tomb of King Tut and seeing a cell phone in his hand. You know, this is, I mean, in 1787, these guys are thinking about intellectual property? And the answer is yes. And if you think of the people around the table, you had Benjamin Franklin, who, by the way, is the founder of the University of Pennsylvania, who was a well-known inventor and publisher. So he's a man that created intellectual property. You had delegates from Virginia, where Jefferson, who was also an inventor and actually became the first the first head of the U.S. Patent Office. Okay, so the point in issue is that the people around the table understood the value of intellectual property. And what was that value? Simple. It can create a ton of money. It can create real wealth. So Article 1 of the Constitution, Clause 8, Subclause 8, has a provision that says something to the effect that Congress can pass laws to protect the useful arts. And the useful arts was, at that time, the term of phrase for what we now call intellectual property. So there are certain constructs we've created. Patents, which tend to protect more technically oriented things, right? And they have, it's a very unique construct because it's very powerful. And for right now, under the law, for a period of 20 years, it protects the claims. So whatever you claim within, so it's a very powerful tool. We have this other construct which we call copyright. What copyright protects is if you fix an idea in a tangible form, like a song, like a book, like a movie, like a podcast. Once you fix it in a tangible form within the US system, you get copyright protection. And the duration of copyright is for the life of the author plus 70 years. Okay, so let's say I'm the sole author. The copyright protection will last for my natural life, and then you add 70 years after that. So by definition, it's a multi-generational value creator. Okay, and then there's probably a fourth category, which is just trade secret. And the most famous trade secret is Coca-Cola. Now, the cool thing about trade secrets is that it lasts forever as long as you keep it secret. So if you think about it, the other very unique thing about trade secrets is that it really only works for things that you cannot reverse engineer.
Okay.
So if I give you think about all this taste testing of Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepsi and all that, right? If you could figure out the Coca-Cola formula, you can make it.
Wow.
You are not breaking the law. As long as you don't go and steal it from their vault. So I've given you 4 different types of intellectual property: patents, copyright, trademarks, and trade secrets. Each one of them is a major driver of value.
Okay.
And particularly for us in the US, we're in a very, very unique situation where over 40% of our GDP, our gross domestic product, in other words, 40% of all the things we make in America and we sell come from industries that depend on intellectual property. So it is the largest single driver of our economy. Just to put this in another way that you can that is easier for people to understand about how powerful this is. Right now, there are 26 human beings in the world who have collectively more wealth than half the human species. So there are roughly 8 billion people in the world. And there are 26 people who have more wealth than over 4 billion human beings. Now, for most people, their reaction to that is, oh my God, income inequality, which is all true. But for me, what was fascinating was, how in God's green earth did that happen? You know, I mean, how is it possible that 26 people could have more wealth than half the human species? And when you ask that question, it leads you to, obviously, to another question. How did they make their money? Every single one of them made their money from intellectual property.
Wow.
It wasn't that they made their money from gas or oil or agriculture or manufacturing. No. Every single one of them made their wealth from intellectual property. Wow. Think about the richest guys in the world. Elon Musk, 100% intellectual property. Zuckerberg, 100% intellectual property. Gates, 100% intellectual property. It's intellectual property that creates this obscene amount of wealth, multi-generational wealth. And you may ask the obvious question, why? Of all the asset classes we know, land, agriculture, manufacturing, all these various asset classes, finance, why is it that intellectual property creates that huge amount of wealth and allows that level of concentration in wealth? I'll tell you. You want me to tell you?
Of course.
Okay. All right. So it's actually very interesting. This is part of my academic interest. I find it absolutely fascinating. So let me make it really straightforward. If a £1,000,000 of gold was discovered today and came into the world market, what will happen to the price of gold?
Down.
It will go down.
Yeah.
Okay. If a billion barrels of oil, additional barrels of oil was discovered today and came to the world market, what will happen to the price of oil?
Drops.
Okay. Right now, let's take an old platform, Facebook. It's been around for quite a while. So it's more of the old platform. There are roughly 2.5 billion people on Facebook. So almost a quarter of the human population is on Facebook. That is the population of India and China combined on Facebook. If one more person joined Facebook, what will happen to the value of Facebook?
Goes up.
Correct. If 1 billion more people join Facebook, 1 billion, what will happen to the price of Facebook? I mean, the value of Facebook?
Continues to go up.
Correct. The direct opposite of what happened with physical items. And the reason is that intellectual property has no upper limit. The more, the merrier. The normal laws of supply and demand do not apply to intellectual property all the way. If 1 billion people are on Facebook, if 4 billion people are on Facebook, the value just keeps on going up.
Wow.
Whereas every other asset class is limited in its value growth by demand and supply. If you oversupply, your price crashes. Okay? But not intellectual property. So it's a fascinating space. And probably the last thing I would say about it is that, and this is why, it's worked for me in terms of my businesses. Most of us are living in a paradigm in which intellectual property is taken for granted. Most young people today, their whole life has been branded, right? From the diapers they used, to the bottles they used, to the clothes they wear, to the phone they have. Everything has a brand name. Everything has some form of intellectual property. And now, a lot of young people in the gig economy are making their whole living by creating content. That's intellectual property, okay? If you look at the African Americans who have become billionaires in this country, almost all of them became billionaires because of intellectual property, right? Either their music or their movies, a lot came through there. Quite a number have also come through tech. That's also intellectual property protection. So for most people, because it's such a part of their paradigm, they're not conscious of it. And they don't really understand its full power. It's almost by accident that they make money, but they don't quite understand that that money is generated primarily because of this construct of intellectual property.
Got it.
And what is the most amazing thing about all this? We made it up. There's no natural law that says, if you hear me say, that's the way I like it, that somehow that means I own it. There's no natural law that, and even if there was natural law, how do you prevent 1 million people from doing it? The only way you can do that is through a legal construct. So we made it up. And this thing we made up has driven so much value.
Very interesting. Very powerful, and understand that. So one of the things now that kind of comes to me of just wondering of, people in the world, celebrities and different people and inventors, the protection piece of it. Do you have horror stories of celebrities or different people that just within the industry that didn't protect their IP properly and, had to pay a price?
Well, I don't know. Sometimes, I don't know whether I would characterize it as horror stories. I mean, if you think about it, I mentioned earlier on very famous trademarks that got lost. Now, that meant you lost a lot of money. At one time, you could prevent anyone from using the word aspirin. Bayer was the only one that could use the word aspirin.
Gotcha.
But now, you go to CVS, there's a store brand, CVS aspirin. So everybody's using aspirin. So if you think about the amount of value that has been lost, that's huge. Horror stories. There was a time in this country of ours where the absolutely most creative people, the most original creators of American music were African Americans, and their copyrights in their music were stolen from them. So-called producers who tended not to be African Americans put their names on this music. So the early jazz and blues and rock and roll musicians, a lot of them had their music stolen. And think about the multi-generational wealth. Think about where their families would have been today if Leadbelly kept all of his copyright. Okay? So horror stories. I mean, multi-generational wealth has been stolen. And then you have people like Grover Washington, who decided not to patent all the amazing things he did with regards to seeds. Okay? He made a choice not to do that. Okay. But think about if he had. A lot of agriculture today in America would have been derived from his works, and there may have been multi-generational wealth that would have been created. The polio vaccine, some of the work was done on the oral version of the polio vaccine at Worcester here on Penn's campus, and a decision was made not to file patents on that because polio was devastating the world, and that made the polio vaccine available to everyone. So there are true horror stories where people inadvertently lost their intellectual property. There are horror stories where people's intellectual property were stolen by other people. And then there are these gracious stories where people decided to make their intellectual property available to everyone and not claim it. So it's a powerful tool, and you can choose how you want to maximize it.
Got you. So now I'm seeing it, in a full new lens, and I thank you. From its origin, at least in the United States, starting at the U.S. Constitution, and now we're in 2025, and now we have the advancement of artificial intelligence. Where do you think the future might go with intellectual property with artificial intelligence? Does it help, hurt, or stay neutral?
You've asked one of the most profound questions that we are wrestling with right now. And it's a real difficult and complicated issue. So let me try to break it down a little bit so you can understand. So remember, I talked about 4 constructs, right? Patents, copyright, trademarks, unfair competition. Okay. So artificial intelligence, particularly this current version, generative artificial intelligence, touches on all 4. You can get on ChatGPT and say, write me a story about, and you give it 4 or 5 factors, and it will generate a story for you. You can let me just use ChatGPT as an example. You can say, design a logo for me. And this is what I want to convey in the logo. And it will design a logo for you. You can say, write me a jazz piece. And I want it to be mellow, and I want it to have saxophones in it, and it will generate a jazz piece for you. Okay. So the question now is, wait a minute, do our laws, which, remember, the Constitution was 1787, so we're using concepts of the 18th century, 19th century, maybe even 20th century. Do those legal constructs, do those concepts truly capture where we are today? And the courts are already wrestling with it. So they're wrestling with who is an inventor for a patent. Where do you draw the line between using intellectual property as a tool, just like a paintbrush, and where it itself is the creator? So right now in this podcast, you're using different platforms, right? Well, each of the instruments you're using, they have AI in there. That's why we can have this conversation without, a $200,000 equipment for us to do this, right? Because you've got relatively small tools that are being run by AI. Now, clearly it's a tool. Clearly it's a paintbrush. Clearly, none of the tools you're using can function by themselves. You have to set them up. You have to tell them what you want. So clearly it's a tool. But when you have generative AI, and the example I gave with just a few minutes ago, where you say to ChatGPT, write me a story, who's the author? Because all you did was to give it the prompt. Does that make you the author? Because you didn't write a single line. You just gave it the prompt. And in fact, the prompt, if you use the audio portion, you don't even have to type it in. You just have to speak to it.
Yeah.
So if it produces a 20-page document, who's the author?
Good question.
So far, the courts have been wrestling with this. And you have some courts that say, well, it depends on what percentage of what is created is you, and what percentage is the AI.
Wow.
That becomes a case by case discussion. Okay. There are other courts who had early judgments that said only human beings are covered by our intellectual property laws. Only human beings. So you have to be a human being to get a patent. You have to be a human being to get copyright. You have to be a human being to get a trademark. You have to be a human being to have trade secrets. That is becoming even more difficult to uphold. So the courts are wrestling with this. I think going forward, answering that question will lead to probably two things. It's already leading to different, so we've passed in the States new laws that address specific aspects of this, but I think we're going to eventually have to think more holistically and say, okay, how do we adjust all of our intellectual property laws to accommodate AI? I think we're going to eventually have to do that. But I also think that the next thing it's going to lead to is, I think we need to ask ourselves about the duration of protection that we give right now. You know, wow. Think about copyright. We tag copyright by the life of the author. Who's the author? So because that's when we have to tag the 70 years after the death of the author. So if you give the prompt, is it your death that triggers the, let's now start counting 70 years?
Gotcha.
You know. So I think we probably are going to have to wrestle with the duration of protection that we give. But there's no doubt, because we've already seen it. We've already seen it. There's no doubt that the use of intellectual property within the context of AI is most likely going to lead to an even further concentration of wealth. There are social ramifications of what is happening with AI and intellectual property, and I think we as a society are going to have to wrestle with it. The courts are already wrestling with it a little bit, but I think the social impact is even bigger than that.
Bigger, understandable. So almost in closing, for the years that you've been involved and been around intellectual property and law of it, what are some good fun facts that are out there for intellectual property, of maybe worth of logos, different things are worth of somebody's portfolio with different things, and who owns something?
Well, I've touched on it a little bit. By the way, I was just thinking, the math I gave you, it was, if you have 10 billion, 10% is a billion.
Yeah.
So 50% is 500 million. So it's even more. It's 10 times more. I was thinking of just a billion. Look, I love this space. I think it's a great platform. I think that some of the most creative people on the face of the earth have been people of color.
Sure.
And that creativity, I always emphasize this, that creativity is not just in the arts. When you think about it, most people immediately think about arts. They think about music and dance and film. But in the sciences, holy cow.
Yeah.
I mean, African Americans have been some of the greatest inventors this country has ever seen. So I think that it is one of the best tools for people to use to create multi-generational wealth. And depending on which form of intellectual property you choose to create, some cost a lot of money to create. Like patents are hard things to do. But music and film and artistry doesn't cost that much to do. And if you create content and you protect it in terms of your intellectual property in it, you could create multi-generational wealth. And that's what excites me about this space. I've spent a lot of my time in the pharmaceutical and drug development industry. And the good Lord has been kind. We've been successful with getting a couple of drugs through the FDA. And, they've generated good, solid returns because we had patents around them. We had trademarks around the name of the drug and that kind of thing. We had copyright on the descriptions we developed to market the drug. And there were still things that we had as trade secrets. So all four constructs of intellectual property we're able to use very successfully in the pharmaceutical industry. And that has been, I've been fortunate to be able to do that. So I always encourage people that, particularly those who are creatives, to always have at the back of their mind the value proposition of protecting their intellectual property, because it could be the basis of multi-generational wealth.
For sure. Mr. Osagie, thank you for your time.
Pleasure was mine.
Pleasure. Blessings.
All right.